Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast. I'm Ryan.
I'm Amanda and we're your hosts.
And today we're going to be talking about dark tourism.
Wahaha.
A bit of a somber topic.
Somber but interesting. So
dark...
I was going to say, so what is dark tourism?
Let me tell you. I was on Wikipedia 5 minutes ago.
Handy dandy Wikipedia.
And Wikipedia says... dark tourism is tourism involving travel to sites historically associated with death and tragedy.
So this is things like concentration camps, any type of memorial, remembering death. So something like Ground Zero or like the Holocaust Memorial. What else is it? Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, and a lot of sites where horrible things happen to end up becoming tourist attractions. I think people kind of have a bit of a fascination with like morbid stuff in some ways. And like even you see like a car accident, everyone kind of like peers over to see what's going on over there. So,
well, it's that sort of thing. It's like you want to look away, but you can't stop looking. Like how many times do you hear that? Like I wanted to stop looking, but I just couldn't. Yeah.
So what are we going to dig into today?
We're going to sort of talk about this concept of dark tourism and really get into our sort of thoughts on dark tourism, why we've engaged in these activities, why we think people are sort of interested in these type of tourist attractions, why they continue to remain popular. And then sort of the concept of, is it right to be spending money on something like this? And, our opinions on whether or not there are effects from engaging in dark tourism.
Yeah. And the reasons people tend to go or feel like they should go, maybe some negative outcomes of these memorials that people aren't thinking about. And yeah, thinking about on a deeper level, instead of just like, I'm near Munich, I'm going to go to Dachau, thinking about the implications of all of that.
Yeah, totally. And it's pretty interesting because before... we were talking in sort of like the planning stage of this podcast, I was actually not really clear on dark tourism. And after doing a little bit of research on it, it's kind of interesting to me to see the list of places that I've actually visited that are considered dark tourism. And that's really been getting me thinking sort of, my motivations behind that. And it's definitely something to consider if you are thinking about going to these places or you have already been.
Yeah, and really the genesis for the discussion was when I was in the Czech Republic and in Hungary, I met a lot of people going up to Krakow in Poland and going to Auschwitz. And I thought about going and really, haven't reasoned out like where I stand on, is it, a good thing to do or not a good thing to do? Going to, the most horrific of the concentration camps or any of them. So I had a lot of good discussions with people I met in hostels, and then we're trying to get down to the bottom of the issue. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting because it's definitely not, black or white. There's definitely it's hard to just label it as right or wrong. It definitely is. There's a lot of gray area in there. So I guess we'll just dig in and sort of share with you our opinions on that.
Yeah. So to start with, what places have you been that would be considered dark tourism?
So I've been to the London Dungeons in London, England, Ground Zero, which is the 9/11 memorial in New York City, and Dachau concentration camp outside of Munich. And then I've also been to the killing fields in Cambodia and the Holocaust Memorial / Museum with yourself.
In Berlin.
Yes, in Berlin. And it's kind of interesting to think about sort of, why I went there, like what I was sort of like looking to get out of that experience or what the motivation behind it was. Because I feel like it is a lot, it's like thinking about when I was in Munich, I was with two girlfriends and we're at a hostel and they kind of, have all these like different activities that you can do in the Munich area. And so it's like, okay, you can go see the Neuschwanstein Castle, which is the one that Walt Disney based the Disney Castle off of. One of the most beautiful castles in Europe, apparently. And then it's like, you can go on this beer hall crawl, and then you can go to Dachau concentration camp. And it's like, a visit to Germany isn't complete without seeing a concentration camp. You know, that's kind of how it's advertised, I guess. And I just, didn't really think further than that. It's like, I'm in Germany. That's something I should do.
So you felt like you had a bit of a duty or something?
I guess maybe. Partially. It sort of almost feels like, because the concentration camps are open to the public, that, I've learned about this awful thing in school. And it's like, they've opened up this memorial. Like, I should go there and like kind of pay tribute to the people who suffered there. Like, I should go see what it's like. And it's almost this idea of, you need to see it to understand how bad it was, to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself. I feel like that's kind of like the message that was in my head. Like, I'm over here. It's really important for me to do this.
Yeah. And I guess that, so when you learn about these things in school, you don't obviously get a complete picture of the event, but it's still like, it's like so horrible to imagine. It's kind of like an abstraction. Mm-hmm. Like hearing like, millions of people were killed. It's like, you can't really like fathom like what that is like, or what the experience would be like for people there. But to go there, you're kind of like struck with like, this was like a real thing that was happening. Like, it's real, but it's not as like as real as like going there.
Yeah. And it's a pretty like crazy experience. Like, I had this sort of moral dilemma getting there. I'm like, is it appropriate to like take photos here? Like, is that something that you should be doing? And then it's once I've taken some photos, are these Facebook appropriate? Like, there was a lot of like, should I, like, what's okay? Because it is such a dark thing. And it's interesting going to something like a concentration camp, because you can walk through, like, they've got sort of tours set up where they educate you on, the different parts. Like, this is where the people experience this, and this is where people suffered from this, and et cetera, et cetera. And they take you through like a gas chamber, and it's like, you go in and they're like, hundreds of people stood in here and they opened these gas valves and they were gassed to death. And it's just like, it's eerie, and it feels wrong on a lot of levels.
It feels wrong that happened, or it feels wrong that...
I think like it definitely feels wrong that it happened. I don't think that anyone deserves to be gassed to death, especially just based on, their heritage or identity or religion or anything. But it feels really wrong to be in there. Like people died there. It's like, and we're just in there, and there's people snapping photos of it. And to me, photos capture memories, and, can you capture a memory of a gas chamber where hundreds of people were really cruelly killed? Like, it just doesn't, something about it doesn't feel right.
Okay. And so you kind of hinted at it earlier, and then I talked about it a bit, that like the story that's told, or like the selling point of concentration camps as tourist attractions, is that they memorialize the past. They bring this horrible atrocity into the present so that it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. That's the story.
Yeah.
But so that would kind of dictate that when you show up, you have a very personal experience with it. When you're taking photos of it, you're already trying to, it's like, I was here,
Yeah.
I think it's not about having, changing your perspective, about thinking about like the implications of what happened and how that's still possible today, thinking about how that's still going on, like in Africa and some places in Asia, I think.
Yeah, other developing countries.
But so, yeah, there's probably, like, your experience there was like, there's lots of people taking photos, mm-hmm. which means that they're like, this, I want to take it home so I can prove that I went to this place that everyone knows about.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of like going to other places, like going to Ground Zero. I've actually been to Ground Zero twice. So I went in 2009, before Ground Zero was, like, it was really just 2 holes in the ground from buildings not being there anymore. So that was pretty like an eerie experience to see. And then I went back in 2012, and they've got they've turned the holes of where the World Trade Centers were into these, like they've used stone and they've made them into these massive water pools. And then they've written names of the people who like died in 9/11 around the outside. And it's all like this really nice, like granite marble type stone. And it's like this beautiful park where people can, I think, pay money to plant trees and stuff. So it's very different. Like it's become very much like a memorial site there. And it's just like, it's weird because you go to New York and obviously there's like 1.5 million things you can do in this crazy city that's always going, but it seems like almost everyone goes to Ground Zero now. And I feel like a lot of people are telling themselves that like, oh, I'm paying tribute for this awful thing that happened. Like they're going to be a better person if they go and recognize, you know, that people died. Does that make sense?
So do you think people going to concentration camps in Germany, for example, kind of come home with this, like thinking that maybe they have a bit of a moral high ground compared to people who haven't been? Maybe.
Yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say. I guess like I've been there, so I could use personal experience with that answer. It's really hard for me to think about like what my intention was. Like, I feel like it was just like, okay, this is something to do here. Like I should go do this. I learned about it in school. I should go like pay my respects to these people who died. And like, you know, see how awful it was to recognize how lucky I am to live in the world that I live in now. Like, I feel like that's kind of the message that's sent to me, that's put on me.
So it seems like a lot of, with tourism in general, like people make decisions about going places, and like a lot of people make decisions about what to do at those places. But there's a lot of activities, like people show up in the town and there's like, here's the to-do list, you know, let's put them on the treadmill and like shoot them through. They're going to see like a cathedral, a palace. And then if there happens to be something, and then in these select locations like Auschwitz or Krakow, not Auschwitz, Auschwitz, Dachau.
There's lots of other concentration camps too, I think, that are still, that you can go and see throughout, like Germany, Austria.
There's one near Prague.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is like, it seems like a lot of people do them because they're like on the to-do list of like things to do in that town without really thinking about
why.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is difficult to think about sort of like what the motivation is there. I think it's a certain level of like feeling like you should do that because that's the right thing to do, is to pay your respects to this awful thing that happened, and to, you know, think about the people who were, you know, killed in a really awful way. Because when you think about the, like all of those things, like right from the London dungeons to Ground Zero to the killing fields to any type of concentration camp, it's like people have been brutally killed by their own species. And now there's these more memorials erected to remember that. And I don't know if it's like this message that's like, remember what people are capable of, like see what people have done, like be better than that.
So I think that kind of is a good point to transition to thoughts. A couple thoughts I have about it, about these things always have like a political message involved in them, because memorials, like all these sites tend to be based off like maybe like nonprofits running them, or maybe like the government's running them. So they do have like a message and a story they're telling and a perspective they're putting out there.
For sure.
Obviously there's a spectrum of like some that are very neutral, very accurate, and some that are maybe not so accurate. Like, for example, we went to like the Cu Chi tunnels in Vietnam, and that was very, felt very propagandized.
Like they let you see what they want you to see, and they let you see it in a certain way.
Yeah. And there's like animatronic figures of like peasants getting murdered by evil capitalists. Yeah. So the point I was getting at is that there is like a motive and a story behind the things that are selected to be memorialized. For example, the concentration camps, like the Nazis are like this historic evil figure. Like when you look through, when you're like told these narratives in school and taught through history, there's not really any like pure evil, anyone as purely evil as like the Nazis seem to be, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're kind of taught like these guys are evil, like evil incarnate.
Like they're definitely a villain. If there's like a story, like they're the villain.
Villain. And then they're also not really existent anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Like Germany gets over the war, the Nazis are gone. So you can build this monument to this evil thing. It's like, oh, look at how evil these people were that were before us. And this is something that really kind of came to me when we were in Cambodia, because we went to visit, it's called the Killing Fields. It's a monument to an area where there was mass murder of, I think, tens of thousands of people under the Khmer Rouge in the 70s, I think was the time period. But so Cambodia currently today has a horribly corrupt government that's stealing from a ton of people and doing terrible things. But they can kind of point to this monument and say, you know, look at the evil that preceded us. Like, at least we're not those guys. Like, you should be grateful that we just like steal your money and your land and like run roughshod of you, and you have to live in poverty and like have no health care, because at least we're not murdering you.
Yeah.
So it kind of like,
definitely true.
You can put up these monuments to kind of scare people, to say like, oh, look at how much worse it'd be without, you know, the current power system. Mm-hmm. And yeah, invoke some fear in people as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting point to bring up, because it does seem like the memorials are erected as a way of like, remember what happened. Like, this is an acceptable type thing. Like, don't do this again.
And it's very selective. There's a lot of horrible things that happen that don't get memorialized in the same way. When I was in Hungary, I learned a decent amount about like the gulags, like the communist like prison camps. And some of the stories that I heard when I was there were that people had experiences, like people went from concentration camps under the Nazis and also had experiences in gulags in Russia. And they said the gulags in Russia were worse. They weren't actually killing people, like gassing them, but tons of people were dying because they were, you know, beaten, abused, not fed properly. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of them said conditions were better in concentration camps. But you don't hear anything about like Russian gulags growing up.
No, like
at least, sorry, I'm speaking specifically about my experience in the educational system, but I think at least in Canada, you don't really hear anything about that.
Yeah, I definitely didn't learn about that either. I feel like that is probably pretty across the board for Canadian like social studies, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's not the same scale, but in Canada during the First World War, there were internment camps built where a lot of people holding like Austrian, Hungarian citizenship, people we were fighting in the First World War. I think there was Ukrainians as well. All those citizens were rounded up and put into these camps and like lived in pretty shitty conditions. And during the Second World War, tons of Japanese Canadians were rounded up. They mm-hmm. lost their property. People just stole all their stuff. They made them go to like camps in the middle of nowhere. And I think there are a couple that are kind of like, there's museums open to it, but it's very much like a footnote.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
You don't hear about it constantly. They're not really like put out there like, oh, look at the horrible things the Canadian government has done. It's like, look at the horrible thing this Nazi group that's no longer here did. Look at the horrible things that the Khmer Rouge that's no longer here did.
Mm-hmm. I guess it almost feels like it's like a threat for, you know, any type of like group of people who might want to take action in some way like that. I don't know if take action is the right words for that. Like, I feel like it's almost like a don't do this type of threat.
What do you mean?
Like encouraging people to, you know, not behave in that way ever again.
So like memorializing these things, like the Holocaust thing is like, people should know that genocide is a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like, it's almost like, political or government way of being like, don't do this. Like, these people are awful. Don't be like them. They've done all these bad things. Like, you'll be punished for it. Does that seem? Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, not completely.
I don't know if I'm completely like understanding my own thought. Maybe I'll move on from it and see if I can like gather more of what I'm trying to say to articulate it clearly.
But like the idea that a positive effect of, having concentration camps as dark tourist sites is that it pushes people to know that the activities were wrong.
I don't know if it's necessarily a positive effect, but I feel like it's kind of like, when the government or a not-for-profit or a political group puts together these memorials, I feel like the intention behind it is like, look what they did, like, see this, like, don't repeat this action type thing. Mm-hmm. In a way. I don't know if it's like a positive effect or not though. But I feel like that's kind of the idea that's kind of ingrained into us in school is like, look at what these Nazis did to the Jewish people. Like, now there's like, look at these concentration camps. And then you go over there and it's like, oh, you should really like check out a concentration camp while you're here so you can like really see how awful it is. I don't know. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. I don't really think it's like, I think it's somewhere in the middle because I don't really think it's necessarily positive. Like, maybe there are some positive things around it, but I also don't want to be feeling guilty for something that I didn't do.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of like, you go to those things and I know for me, it's like a lot of like sadness comes up and a lot of like guilt. And it's almost like, oh, like I was complaining earlier because so-and-so didn't text me back. And, these people like were gassed to death. Like, that's like a real problem, which is not how I want to live my life.
So you feel that it's got kind of gives you that like, look how much worse it could be. Mm-hmm. You should be grateful of the way you have it and not really, you've got it a lot better.
Yeah.
That's very clear.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking about potentially another dark tourism place that I've been to. Would Pearl Harbor be one?
Yes.
Yeah. So Pearl Harbor is on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. And I went with my family a few years ago. My dad is very interested in war museums and he has a lot of curiosity around the war and what happened. And so we spent quite a while at Pearl Harbor. It's a pretty interesting memorial. There's a massive ship that you can go on. It's probably not a ship. It's like some sort of water battle tank thing.
Battleship?
Maybe a battleship. You sunk my battleship. And then there's this other like memorial area. It's got all the names of the people who died. It's pretty interesting because there are a ton of Japanese people that go there. And when you go, like you pay, it's expensive. You pay like $65 to go, $65 US. And they give you like a flower and you like throw it in. And this memorial is erected over a ship that was like bombed and sank. And it's like, people are just going and like throwing these flowers. And there's a lot of Japanese tourists that do that as well, which I felt was a little bit interesting. I wasn't really too sure, if being there was a good thing or a bad thing. I think I felt a little bit weird the whole time. Do you know what I mean?
Sort of the weird feelings, like kind of confused about, what's going on? Why is this happening? I guess it's tough because like the way that event is painted is like, oh, the Japanese are the bad guys. And now there's all these Japanese people here. But those Japanese people have nothing to do with it.
Totally. And I think that's what was really confusing for me is, I only know what I was taught from a textbook or a teacher when I was in, I guess like high school, probably in social studies. So my only conception of Pearl Harbor is like what I was taught, which was, one morning, the beautiful island of Hawaii was surprisingly bombed by a bunch of Japanese planes. And it was this super tragic event for the United States because it was completely unexpected. And I think that the United States has really made it into like, we're the victims here and the Japanese are really awful. And, you know, obviously there's always more to that because it isn't that black and white. It's not Japanese are bad, Americans are good. There's so much more to it because it's war and everybody's, you know, making their moves like a real life game of Risk. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It was interesting because I went in with this idea like, okay, the Japanese did this awful thing. And then for me, as I was in my early 20s, so as an early, like a late teenager, early 20-something-year-old, I felt very confused as to what the Japanese were doing. I was like, are you tossing these flowers because you're sad for what the Japanese people did, or are you sad because this happened, or are you remembering your people who died? Like I was just a little bit confused. And then it's like, are you just here because this is an attraction here that a lot of people go to?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of like, makes me think about how, so you go through school, and I think a lot of these dark tourist sites actually kind of play into, or like how it comes from a lot of like the history we're taught and you're exposed to through like movies and textbooks and stuff like that. But that kind of tells this story as, you know, nations as teams, as if, so when you're in a war, it's governments waging war against each other. You know, the rulers of Japan with the army of Japan waging war against the rulers of the U.S. with the army of the U.S. But you're kind of taught it's like Japanese Americans, right? Like that's the battle. Like these are teams, right? Everyone in Japan's on Team Japan. Everyone in America's on Team America. Mm-hmm. So now you have people from Team Japan at this thing where it's like, okay, Team Japan's the bad guy and Team America's the good guy. Why are the Team Japan people? It's like those people have nothing to do with it.
Yeah, totally. It's kind of interesting. It makes me think about, there's a book called The Book Thief that Ryan and I have both read. So if anyone out there has read it, you'll definitely understand this. And if anyone hasn't read it, I would highly recommend it because it's a really, really well-written book. But the main character's adopted father in the book is very much against the Nazi party. It's set during World War II. In a small town in Germany. And it's really interesting because it provides this whole other side of like, oh, not everyone in Germany was pro-Nazism. Not everyone in Germany was like, kill the Jews. Like, we hate these people. And I feel like everything I learned was like exactly what you're talking about. Like
team Nazis were evil.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, but it's like everyone in Germany was pro-Nazism and therefore Nazism's bad. Therefore everyone in Germany's bad. Right? Like very like cut and dry, black and white type thing.
Yeah. And there's, I'm listening to an audiobook called For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. And he talks about, in one part of it, about collectives and how collectives kind of lead us away from digging for more information. So the example he gives is like France invaded Germany. You say that to someone and they're like, okay, that happened. Mm-hmm. But like you think, okay, what is France? France is like this area marked on a piece of land. So France can't invade anyone. France isn't a thing. France invades Germany. It's kind of like Ryan punched Sue.
Like, who's Sue?
I don't know. I just made her up. But like as if those collectives were actually things. If you say, you know, 10,000 people from the geographical area west, or, you know, in Western Europe attacked, like, you know, traveled to and started murdering or started killing 5,000 people to the east of them. And those people were defending themselves, which is what is actually happening when France invades Germany. Then you kind of like, okay, like, why are they doing that? Who's leading them? Who's making decisions? You know, what are they after? You get all these questions coming up that people need to know to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Because the collectives aren't things, right? So like I guess if you want to look at like Pearl Harbor, for example, it's like, oh, the Japanese bombed America. Well, it's okay. Hawaii was an independent kingdom until 1900 sometime, not long before then.
I have no idea.
Like, so, you know, a couple thousand people from Japan were dropping bombs on some people from the American mainland who were living on this island at an army base or something. It could like if you get away
Ben
from
Affleck and Josh Hartnett, just to name a few.
Yeah. Does that make sense what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. It's like all a bit like of a mind puzzle, I feel like, for me.
Yeah. So getting back, like we've kind of gotten pretty into the, I don't know, away from maybe like
forest of dark tourism,
but like into more of events and less from the sites. But I think that like true understanding of the events and of history kind of comes from realizing that the narratives aren't true. Like, it's not evil versus good. It's like there's systems, there's people making decisions, there's people. These issues are so complicated. And so going to these dark tourist sites can, you know, it can feed into narratives and feed into that good versus bad thing that kind of leaves you confused. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you can really touch on like the personal stories that are going on in those places and what's really happening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like a very convoluted sort of idea. I guess something that I'm kind of curious about is, so we went to the killing fields together in Cambodia. Do you remember like at that point in time, sort of like what you were thinking when we decided to go there, or like when you decided to go there?
So it was weird for me going to Cambodia because I didn't really know anything about the Khmer Rouge or the history that was what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that we didn't really learn about in school.
And so going there, I think the reasons we went there, like I didn't even know if I knew about it when I pulled into Phnom Penh.
I think maybe I'd read a little bit about it in Our Lonely Planet at that point.
But we were taking a tuk-tuk and he's like, oh, you know, I'll show you around for 2 days. It costs like $15 or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe less. And you know, this is what's included. And so it was kind of like a snap decision. Like, okay, this is his like tour. Like, well, guess we'll go on it. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't really think twice about why. I kind of, there is like a, like kind of feeling like you should go. Like to say, like, if you're near a concentration camp and you're like, you know, I don't want to go.
Like, does that feel like a denial of what has happened?
It's like you're, you know, well, you're just being ignorant doesn't help. You know, I'm not denying that it didn't happen. Yeah, you kind of do feel like a bit of a bad person for being in close proximity to something like that and saying, I don't want to do it. You know, I would rather like do something fun. But that's not entirely true. Like that's not entirely the reason behind it.
I think with the killing fields, it's interesting because getting to Cambodia and then entering into Phnom Penh and finding out about this like really dark history of the country, I think I felt a lot of like, how do I not know that this happened? Like, why is this not taught in public schools in Canada? Like, why, how did all these people die and suffer? And I've had like no conception of it. Yeah. And I feel like that was part of my, like, I need to go like understand this and kind of like see what's happened because I didn't know about it. And I think I felt pretty guilty for that.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because, yeah, I kind of had a bit of a feeling of like, okay, I don't really want to go like seek out these concentration camps in Germany because you learn a ton about that. Well, you not really. You kind of learn a bunch about the narratives in textbooks in school and stuff. Yeah. And then going to Cambodia, didn't know a thing about Khmer Rouge and that whole atrocity. We go to the killing fields and, you know, it's like kind of think about it now, can kind of like still feel those feelings. Like I think that's something that lasts a really long time. It has like a really big emotional impact on you. Like when you go to the killing fields, you walk in and there's this big glass column that's just like filled with skulls.
Yeah, and it's all people that were like killed.
Yeah.
Like brutally killed, not just like shot. Like they were like whipped and lashed and
it makes
hung and gross things.
Yeah, and it makes those events real. And so before I didn't know, now I know. And like I have an emotional connection to this event that I didn't before. Mm-hmm. At the same time, so you were kind of saying that like, oh, it makes you want to know more and dig into it. Mm-hmm. So we went through that tour. You go to killing fields, you go to one of these places where they were using it as a prison to torture people.
Yeah, it's called Tolson.
S21 or something.
Towson. It was an old high school, and then they turned it into a basically a torture facility.
But I haven't since then. I kind of accepted the story that was told at those attractions, mm-hmm. and I really haven't dug deeper.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
So I don't know what the truth is, because I don't think the Cambodian government is like the most trustworthy organization around. I think it's like one of the most corrupt governments in the world. So those attractions maybe I don't think there's anyone saying the Khmer Rouge is a good, like obviously they're terrible and have done horrible things, but
yeah.
So you go to this site, you have a strong emotional reaction because you're seeing like dead bodies around. Mm-hmm. It's horrible to see. And then, they can feed you specific information at that time. Kind of, how true is it? I don't know. But you're emotional and then you get this information and then it like sticks to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you feel like, I don't know, like how did you feel about paying money for that? And like, do you feel like your life is more did you feel like you had a positive or a negative effect from, going there and learning about that?
It's really hard to say. And that's one of the things that's kind of complicated, or maybe the most complicated thing about dark tourist attractions is the fact that not only are, they there and they can serve as a memorial, but they're generating money. Like, mm-hmm. We went and we paid to go to the killing field. So money I earned here is now been given to the Cambodian government because of this horrible thing that another Cambodian government that, they're kind of like linked together in a way. Like I think there's a lot of like Khmer Rouge people who made it into like newer forms of government in Cambodia. Mm-hmm. And now your money's go into those people. Yeah.
And it's like your money doesn't go to like support families who have, gone through a really, really extreme trauma. Like it's going to the Cambodian government. And it's crazy to think that, so my family of 4 went to Pearl Harbor. We each paid $65 US. Like 6 times 4 is 24. So it's like over $250 that we gave to the American government. Like what are they doing with that money? Because that memorial is like, obviously they have to pay staff to work there and they pay people to clean it at the end of the day. But we're just 4 people who went. That memorial is packed every single day.
And so the Pearl Harbor, it's probably run by like a non-profit or some sort of organization.
Yeah, I'm not too positive about that.
But yeah, it would be generating a massive amount of revenue. And like anything, it kind of, like so not-for-profits, the same thing. They kind of start to live for themselves, right? Like they're like, so it kind of becomes like the military industrial complex idea where like, government gives money to the military gets big enough to have influence over government, gives money back to the military. It's kind of this like reinforcing thing mm-hmm. where like people go to this dark tourist site, creates a lot of revenue. The dark tourist site to attract more people kind of has the incentive to kind of make this story more emotional for people, create this like better narrative, mm-hmm. make more people feel sadder about what happened there, make this event more popular and drive it more into the mainstream so that you can get more tourists. Mm-hmm. Because like there's people who work there and like they're going to be out of their job if people move on past this event. So like the people working at Pearl Harbor want to make sure that like, Pearl Harbor's in the mainstream talk. People talk about it. People feel bad about it so that people go and visit it.
And is that it? Is it like this feeling of guilt for these things that happen that make us want to go and visit and sort of like pay money for it and like, I don't know, pay our dues, I guess? It's like, oh, my life is really great. Like I should go, you know, but I feel bad for this thing that happened. So I should go like pay my dues. I don't know. I'm just trying to get to like
what motivates people to go.
Yeah, I was just like, I guess running with the idea that you just said, like maybe it's like people, you know, have this sense of like guilt that their life is good, and so they want to go, you know, pay tribute to this really bad thing that happened.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to really like think about what motivates people to go, because I've like, as far back as I remember, like the first time we went to Europe right at university, I felt kind of uncomfortable about the idea of going to concentration camps. Mm-hmm. Didn't really have like a well-reasoned out position on it, but just kind of felt like as if me going there meant something, and like I wasn't really comfortable with what that meant.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely
like didn't even know what that meant, but like it's kind of vague. But for me, it feels like there is kind of this pull of like, you should do this thing, and that
definitely resonates with me.
You're kind of, it's like, it's almost like the path of least resistance is to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I'm just like, and obviously, you know, we're not going to figure out the answer to dark tourism in a 45-minute, an hour long podcast, but I don't really know. Like I'm having still a hard time. Like when you were talking about, you know, messaging me and we're talking about, oh, I might go to Auschwitz. I was like, oh, like I still have this feeling like, oh, that's something I want to do. I guess maybe it's like curiosity because I've like read books about it and I learned about it, and to see it for yourself is to kind of be able to form your own opinion and have your own feelings on it.
And I think too, just a lot of tourism in general, people like to go to places that are well known, that are kind of like not close to home. I was going to say exotic, but I think that has too many like hot, nice place connotations. But
beautiful like, sandy beach with a blue ocean and a palm tree.
So like these certain events, certain dark, terrible events have, you know, really big impacts in pop culture. We've learned about World War II stuff in school so much. Like you can say the word Auschwitz and everybody here knows it. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows where Auschwitz is. Well, not a lot of people know where like Chesky Krumlov is.
I didn't, like 3 weeks ago.
But so going somewhere that's far away, that people around you haven't been to but know of, kind of creates this sense of like, you know, look at me, I've been to this thing that you haven't been to. So I think it's like the same thing drives people to go to Machu Picchu, in a way contributes to the Auschwitz thing. It's like Auschwitz is far away, Machu Picchu is far away.
Yeah, you know, and I think
you don't get as cool of pictures.
Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't been. Maybe there's a massive cool mountain with llamas. I don't think there's llamas at Auschwitz.
But even it's like, you know, we're talking and we kind of make a joke, and it's like, oh, I feel bad about joking about that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sometimes I make jokes when I feel uncomfortable. That was that moment right there, in case anybody missed that. Feeling uncomfortable. Yeah, I think that is part of it. You know, it's like, it is similar to sort of this Machu Picchu, Eiffel Tower, Colosseum. You know, there's kind of these big things that people talk about and they talk up, and it's like, oh, you went to Poland and you didn't see Auschwitz? Like, why would you not do that? Like, that's like the thing to do there. Yeah. And it's kind of like, why is that the thing to do there? Why is that? I don't know. I feel like that's like a whole nother topic outside of dark tourism that we could get into.
Yeah, but I do feel like there's kind of, even talking about it, like there's this way like you ought to be talking about it in a certain way. You know, you shouldn't be having fun. You shouldn't, you know, you should be sad. Like
I totally get that, because when I went to Dachau with two of the girls I lived with at the time, we had such beautiful weather through Germany, and the day that we went to Dachau was the only day that it was cloudy. And I remember like we talked about this, but like thinking and feeling like, oh, this weather is so appropriate. Like it would feel so wrong to be at a concentration camp, like thinking about tanning and like, you know, getting this vitamin D and feeling happy because the sun was out, because you kind of want to be, it almost feels like more appropriate to be somber. And we got there and it's like, can I take a photo? Like, is that right? Is that wrong? Like, is it weird? Like there is a certain level of like,
don't know how to act. You feel like you should be like, as if the way you're taught you should be acting isn't natural. Mm-hmm. And like you like don't know how it is.
For sure. And it's 100% like it is really, really sad to go there. But at the same time, you know, nobody in my family like died at Auschwitz. Nobody in my family was a part of, well, debatable, but I don't think anyone in my family was a part of the like getting people into Auschwitz. I mean, I don't know that for sure, but I don't really have, I guess what I'm saying is I don't really have a personal connection to Auschwitz, which makes it hard to be, you know, standing there crying because I'm not remembering one specific person who I really cared about.
Do you think there is like kind of a, like a, I don't know, I was going to call it like spiritual one-upsmanship, but like, it's like a guilt thing. It's like, you know, like you see people there and they're crying and it's like, oh, they're winning this thing. It's like, you know, I went there and I was so sad and so touched. I'm better than you because I was sadder about what happened at this place.
I mean, maybe. I think like, you know, to listeners out there, if you're thinking like, what are these people talking about? We've kind of really talked a lot about like, and been venturing into sort of like unconscious feelings and becoming more present with them. And I think maybe people do that at an unconscious level. I don't think a lot of people are like standing there crying, being like, oh, I'm crying harder than that person. Like I'm better than them. No, I think maybe like at an unconscious level, because I think there is a very sort of like, I think society is very concerned about what other people are thinking. And I guess that's a lot of it. Like you don't want to go to Poland and have your friends think that you're inconsiderate or thoughtless or senseless because you didn't want to go to Auschwitz.
Yeah. And like, so the feelings that would come, or maybe the labels that would come attached to avoiding a site like that would be kind of like ignorant, like no, not compassionate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and having been to some of the, like having been to a concentration camp and been to the killing fields, like I think that there is a certain level of positive effect from seeing firsthand these things. Like there is walking in a gas chamber and having a guy be like, yeah, 500 people stood in this like packed room and gas was open on them and then they were gassed to death. Like that's pretty like, whoa. You know, it's one thing to read it about it in a book, and I think you can really make it like fictionalize it almost like it's a story, like Batman and Robin type thing. Like you can fictionalize it when, yeah, exactly. When you're reading about it, but to actually like see it, you're like, oh, whoa, like this actually happened. So I feel like there is some positive effects that can come from seeing that firsthand.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah, I mean, and on the other hand, is that the same?
Yeah.
I was going to say on the same hand.
The other hand.
In case anyone's caught this in the last 40 some odd episodes, I'm not good with sayings. Are they sayings? Cultural references? What are they? Slangs? I don't know. I seem to always mix them up.
Turns of phrase?
Yeah, that's what it is. Is it?
Turn of phrase, I think is what the...
But one of the dark tourism sites that I've seen that I wanted to touch on before we finish is the London dungeons, because like, so I think that there is definitely like positive effects from seeing something like a concentration camp firsthand or seeing the killing fields. Something like the London dungeons is kind of like a whole other realm of dark tourism. For those of you who haven't been to the London dungeons, they have created it into like an interactive tourist site. So it's kind of like you're learning and being educated on what happened during sort of like the Jack the Ripper plague days in London, which is pretty terrible. But they've like you kind of walk through almost like this haunted house type thing. And the entire thing ends with a ride. So it's almost like, you know, I've talked about before how it's nice to go to a concentration camp and see that firsthand because it makes it very real as opposed to just reading books about these types of things. Whereas like going to something like the London Dungeons almost adds to this narrative. Like it doesn't make it more real. It makes it more like fun, I guess. And to me, you know, the Jack the Ripper stuff isn't fun. It's not funny. It's not enjoyable. Like to me, that's really, that type of dark tourism is really negative.
And I wonder if that's kind of the extension of just like once you set this thing up and, it's going to try to survive. And what I mean by that is like, you've got this organization, maybe it's not for profit, maybe it's for profit, but the people there have jobs and it's in their best interest to make this thing continue going on, making money. So it maybe starts as a somber thing where it's like, oh, we're really going to memorialize the people that, this horrible psychopath guy killed. Like it's a terrible thing that happened. Mm-hmm. It starts off in like a somber way that's kind of respectful. And it's like, once it's like, this organization wants to grow, these people want to make more money. Like the people working there are self-interested. And so how do they promote it? It's like, oh, it's got to get more, black and white, more of a narrative, more attraction. Like we've got to make it like more interesting. Maybe there should be a ride. Like people love rides. Like there should be a ride.
That's like exactly
there should be a concession, and he just goes down this path. It's like, I wonder if that's something that happens, like maybe 100 years from now, a concentration camp, like once people are so far disconnected from the actual people that were involved, it has to keep like, upping itself to try to still stay culturally relevant, still attract people, still make money. Yeah.
I mean, that definitely could be something that happened. It's just like, thinking back to it, I mean, I was 18 when I went to it, so I wasn't really thinking deeply about, Jack the Ripper and, how awful this was. And it's really easy to disconnect from that when, they've got like these scenes with sort of like robots moving and like doing fun things. And you like walk through this thing and, they're talking about how hot it is and they kind of make it slightly uncomfortable to be in that room. But it was really hard to connect with it emotionally. Like I didn't have any type of emotional connection to how awful things in London were during this period of time. Like it's really easy to disconnect from having those emotions when you're just like sort of watching these like interactive things and you're like finishing off with a ride. Like I think for most of it, I was like, I just want to do this ride. Like I was promised a ride. Like I just want to do that. It was almost like going through like a haunted house or something. Mm-hmm. I think it's the best way to describe what that tourist attraction was like. So that is definitely a dark tourism site that I would probably not encourage our listeners to go to. Just because I didn't feel like it had very many benefits for me.
So do you think that when it is a dark tourist attraction, there should be some sort of like some sort of positive outcome? Like, so for example, if someone builds a zip line and, people go, people don't go, it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. Like you can go to the zip line. It's like, if that's what floats your boat, maybe the zip line kind of sucks compared to other zip lines. You'd be better off spending your money elsewhere. Versus like a dark tourism attraction kind of feels like there's more like at stake with people going or not going.
What do you mean there's more at stake?
So I think you go to a dark tourist attraction, you can have a really emotional experience and it can really shift your view on things about, on specifically events, systems, the way the world works.
Okay. Yeah.
The way maybe if you go to a concentration camp, you don't feel comfortable expressing, your dislike of certain political things because you're like, what, at least I'm not getting murdered. And that doesn't happen with a regular attraction.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely more of, I guess, like an emotional reaction or connection in terms of like a some type of dark tourism.
So what do you mean by that?
I guess I mean, like, you know, there's a lot of different types of tourist attractions. And in terms of dark tourism, you see something that's really awful and you've got sort of more of that like emotional response from it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then like the kind of, my thought that is from going through this and talking about it, about like, how do I want to interact with dark tourist attractions in the future? I think number one is like really identifying that feeling of when you feel like you should or you ought to, or maybe feel guilty for not doing it. Mm-hmm. Like that's not a good reason to do something.
Yeah.
And then also when you are there, you have a very strong emotional experience, which I think can be good or can be bad because it can open you up to being accepting information that may not be completely bias free, like it has an opinion.
Yeah.
And then if you don't dig deeper later on into other perspectives on it, you can get like an incomplete picture that's like very firmly rooted in your belief system because you have such an emotional reaction to it.
Totally.
And like, I don't want that to be misinterpreted because of the material we're talking about as like any way saying that like the Holocaust wasn't a horrible thing or the killing fields in Cambodia aren't a horrible thing. Like they're clearly really horrible, but there's like, it's like part of a really complicated system and there's so many stories and so many things contributing to what's going on. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to get a complete picture at the place where you're having this really strong emotional reaction to it.
Totally.
So an emotional reaction at a site like that can be kind of this gateway into knowledge, into understanding, or it can kind of close you down and like make you a bit dogmatic about something.
Ooh, interesting choice of word. Dogmatic. Yeah, no, I think it's also really important to remember that, you know, when you're at a memorial site, something has been set up for you to see. You know, even if you're going through a concentration camp, like there's aspects of it that they don't let you go into. They're letting you see what they want you to see. So I think that that's something really important to remember. And that, you know, if you're seeing something you're curious about, go out and find that knowledge. In saying that, like, I don't want any listeners out there to walk away from this feeling like, you know, we don't think they should go see dark tourism. I'm completely an advocate of people doing what they think that they want to do. I guess my point that I'd want to leave people with is if you're going somewhere and there's dark tourism, I challenge you to really consider why you want to go see that. And really think about, is it because it's, you know, the number one site to see on TripAdvisor, it's the number one thing to see in your Lonely Planet book, or it's, you know, what your friends all expect of you, or is it because you really want to gain a greater knowledge about this world event? I could just really consider why you want to go, I think.
Yeah, I'd really agree with that.
Do you have anything else to add?
I think like it's a pretty big, intense topic to wrangle with. So if any of the listeners or any of you guys listening have any thoughts, like we'd love to hear from you by email or.
Yeah, the World Wanders podcast at gmail.com. Show notes for the episode will be up at www.theworldwanders.com. We're always open to questions, comments, opinions, feedback, any of that. So feel free to reach out. This is a super convoluted topic with a lot of depth to it. So I think we're kind of just, I want to say skimming the surface because I feel like we went a little deeper than that, but there's still a lot more to it. So definitely reach out if you have anything to say. Thanks for listening.
Ciao.